A property surrounded by security cameras, a driveway sensor that chimed with every approach, 4 German shepherds stationed like sentries around the perimeter, multiple firearms within arm's reach of both adults who lived there. This was a home designed to keep danger out, a fortress in the Ohio countryside, built layer by layer by a man who believed in self-reliance and preparation. And yet, inside that bedroom, a man lay motionless, a point-blank wound to the back of his head. His wife on the phone with 911, screaming for help, her voice cracking with desperation as she tried to explain what had happened. The cameras had recorded nothing. The dogs hadn't barked. The sensors hadn't triggered. A revolver sat on the kitchen floor, one round fired, the chamber warm. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no evidence that anyone had come or gone in the night. If no one had broken in, then how did this happen? And if someone did break in, how did they manage to bypass everything without leaving a single trace? For investigators arriving at the scene that morning, these questions would become an obsession that consumed years of their careers. Because in the investigation that followed, the answer they found wasn't one anyone wanted to believe. The truth, as they came to see it, was darker and more disturbing than any intruder theory could ever be. Jeremy Scott Simcoe came into the world on July 7, 1973, in Lorain, Ohio, a small city on the shores of Lake Erie where blue-collar values ran deep and neighbors still knew each other by name. The town had a working-class heartbeat, shaped by steel mills and shipyards, by men who came home tired and women who held families together through difficult times. He grew up in Sheffield Township, surrounded by dense woodlands and the kind of silence that makes you notice every rustling leaf. From an early age, Jeremy was drawn to the outdoors. While other kids spent summers glued to television screens, he was out exploring, climbing, learning to read the natural world around him. At Clearview High School, he found his competitive outlet on the wrestling mat. He wrestled varsity at the 135-pound weight class. Wrestling taught him discipline and how to push through exhaustion when every muscle screamed to quit. Those who knew him then remember a young man with intensity in his eyes, competitive, focused, unwilling to settle for second place. After graduating in 1991, Jeremy enrolled at Hocking Technical College in Nelsonville, where he studied arboriculture, the cultivation and management of trees. It was a path that combined his love of nature with practical skills. He started working for established companies, Edwards Tree Service first, then Davy Tree Service. These jobs were his education beyond the classroom. He studied the business from every angle, how things were run, what worked, and what didn't. In 1997, at just 24 years old, he founded Simcoe Tree Service. Building a business from nothing is never easy. But Jeremy attacked it with the same determination he'd brought to the wrestling mat. He was meticulous about doing things right, every cut precise, every cleanup thorough. He would climb trees that made other arborists nervous, moving through branches 60 feet above the ground with artistic confidence. Within a few years, Simcoe Tree Service had built a reputation as one of the premier operations in Lorain County. The business that had started with one man and a chainsaw grew into something substantial: trucks, equipment, employees, an expanding client list. But there were two sides to this coin. On job sites, Jeremy could be loud, strict, demanding. He expected perfection from his crews and didn't soften his criticism when they fell short. Some described him as a hothead, quick to frustration, unafraid of confrontation. His high standards made sense in dangerous work, but they also made enemies. Not everyone appreciated his management style. Away from work, a different Jeremy emerged. Friends and family described him as an avid naturalist who could spend hours identifying plants, tracking animals, simply being present in the wilderness. He loved campfires and cooking outdoors. He was a natural teacher, patient in ways that surprised people who knew his workplace reputation. He invested heavily in his nieces and nephews. He taught them to swim, to hunt safely, to drive on back roads. He passed down the practical knowledge that had shaped his own childhood. His family was close-knit. His mother, Rose Mager, his father, Robert J. Simcoe, his sisters, Melanie and Hillary, his paternal grandmother, Mary Simcoe. His in-laws, Judy and Rolando Maldonado, had welcomed him into their family when he married their daughter. That daughter was Julene. Jeremy and Julene had built something together beyond just a marriage. They were business partners as well as spouses, running Simcoe Tree Service side by side. She handled the administrative work, scheduling, billing, paperwork. He handled the physical work, climbing, cutting, the skilled labor that paid the bills. People who knew them often described them as best friends. They took long hikes together with their 4 German shepherds, the dogs that would later become central to understanding what happened. The Simcoe property on North Ridge Road in Brownhelm Township wasn't just a home, it was a compound. A gate blocked the driveway entrance. Even if someone got through, a driveway sensor would trigger a loud tone inside the house. The home had door sensors on every first-floor entrance. Open any door, and 3 rapid beeps would sound throughout the house. A speaker near the 3rd-floor loft ensured that even someone sleeping upstairs would hear the alert. Security cameras covered the front and back, with views of the driveway and barn. The footage was always recording. And then, there were the dogs. 4 German shepherds, large, alert, and described by visitors as vicious-looking. At night, they were chained around the perimeter, positioned to detect anyone approaching. Living alarms with teeth. Inside, firearms were never far away. Both Jeremy and Julene had concealed carry permits. A 9mm was kept in the bedroom. A .357 Magnum often sat in a holster inside a first-floor china cabinet. Jeremy lived in a rural area where police response times could stretch long. He'd built his security system piece by piece, creating layers of protection that would warn him of any threat long before it reached his bedroom. He had prepared for every possible scenario. Every scenario except one. Tuesday, November 17th, 2009. According to later accounts, it was an ordinary day at the Simcoe household. Julene spent part of the afternoon canning pumpkins. The couple watched television in the evening. Nothing remarkable. Around 10 p.m., Jeremy went outside to secure the dogs for the night. The security cameras recorded this, the last normal footage they would capture. When he came back inside, the kitchen door was locked. The security system was active. The cameras were rolling. Jeremy went to bed in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. Julene would later say she didn't join him there. She told investigators she went to the 3rd-floor loft to sleep on the couch. Her explanations varied. It was too hot. Jeremy had pushed her out of bed. His snoring was unbearable. The explanations changed depending on when she was asked. This inconsistency would later become a focus of investigation, but everyone agreed. In the hours that followed, the cameras recorded nothing unusual. The driveway sensor remained silent. The door sensors didn't chime. The 4 German shepherds didn't bark. The fortress held its breath. Until it didn't. At approximately 6 a.m. on Wednesday, November 18, 2009, a gunshot rang out inside the Simcoe home. Jeremy Simcoe was shot in the back of the head at point-blank range while lying in his bed. The barrel of the weapon had been so close to his skull that investigators would later describe it as a near-contact wound. He likely never knew what was happening. He never had a chance to fight back, to reach for the 9mm beside his bed, to use any of the skills or preparation that had defined his approach to life. He was killed in his sleep, in his own bed, in the fortress he had built to protect himself. Minutes later, Julene Simcoe called 911. Her voice was frantic, desperate, the kind of raw panic that makes dispatchers lean forward and type faster. She told the operator that someone had broken in, that her husband had been shot, that she needed help immediately. She stayed on the line following instructions, attempting CPR on a man who was already beyond saving. When officers arrived, they found Julene still on the phone, still talking to dispatchers. She explained what had happened, or what she said had happened. She had been sleeping on the third-floor loft couch when she heard a loud noise. At first, she thought it might be Jeremy firing at an animal from the bedroom window, something he'd done before when wildlife threatened their property or dogs. But something felt wrong. She went downstairs to check on him. In the darkness, she felt blood. And then she heard another noise somewhere else in the house. Footsteps, maybe, or a door. She grabbed the 9mm from the bedroom, using the glow from an alarm clock to disengage the safety, and fired 2 shots into the hallway. Then she found Jeremy's phone and called 911. A .357 Magnum revolver lay on the kitchen floor. 1 round had been fired. The 2 hallway shots had come from the bedroom 9mm that Julene claimed to have fired. But here's where the case took its first strange turn. There was no sign of forced entry anywhere. The doors and windows were locked, all except the kitchen door, which officers found standing open when they arrived. The screen door was closed, but unlocked. The security cameras had recorded nothing after Jeremy secured the dogs at 10 p.m. No approaching vehicle. No figure moving through the darkness. No shadow, no silhouette, nothing at all. The driveway sensor hadn't triggered. The dogs hadn't barked. 4 German shepherds, positioned specifically to alert their owners to intruders, had remained silent throughout whatever happened in that house. Officers searching the property found no evidence that anyone had entered from outside. No footprints leading to the house, at least none that could be attributed to a stranger. No DNA from an unknown source. Nothing stolen. Nothing disturbed beyond what the crime itself had caused. If a killer had broken in, they had done so without leaving a single trace. They had bypassed a locked gate, a driveway sensor, 4 aggressive dogs, multiple cameras, and locked doors. They had navigated a dark, unfamiliar house, found and retrieved a weapon from a china cabinet, located the bedroom, shot a sleeping man from inches away while his armed wife was somewhere unknown in the building, placed the gun carefully on the kitchen floor without dropping it or leaving marks, and disappeared into the night. All without waking anyone. All without the dogs making a sound. Investigators looked at this scenario and struggled to believe it could be true. But if not an intruder, then who? As investigators dug deeper into the evidence, small inconsistencies began to surface like cracks in a foundation. There was the matter of Julene's changing explanations for why she slept on the third-floor couch instead of in bed with her husband. Temperature, snoring, being pushed out, each version slightly different from the last, none of them quite fitting together into a coherent picture. There was the .357 Magnum on the kitchen floor. Officers noted that the gun showed no impact marks, no dents or scratches that would suggest it had been dropped by someone fleeing in panic. It looked, to their trained eyes, like it had been placed there deliberately, carefully set down rather than abandoned in haste. The china cabinet where the gun was normally stored was found slightly ajar, the empty holster visible inside like an accusation. And then There was what happened at the hospital. A nurse who was present when Julene arrived would later testify about something that stopped her cold. According to the nurse, Julene initially said, "I shot my husband." Then, almost immediately, she corrected herself. "Someone shot my husband." A slip of the tongue? Trauma-induced confusion? The kind of mistake anyone might make in the worst moments of their life? Or something more revealing, a truth that slipped out before the careful story could be maintained? Investigators also examined the couple's financial situation, looking for any pressure that might constitute motive. They learned that Jeremy and Julene had been trying to secure a bank loan to purchase adjacent land, an expansion of their property that would have required significant capital. The loan had recently been denied. Julene had mentioned moving the 9mm from its usual spot because of an appraisal related to the loan application. But when investigators contacted the bank, representatives said no appraisal had been scheduled. Another inconsistency. Another detail that didn't quite add up. And there was one more digital breadcrumb that caught investigators' attention. On the evening before Jeremy's death, just hours before the shooting, someone had accessed an online obituary for Julene's father. When asked about this, Julene denied doing it and couldn't explain why anyone in the household would have visited that page on that particular night. A strange coincidence? Or something more deliberate? A moment of reflection before irreversible action? None of these details proved anything on their own, but together, they painted a picture that made investigators deeply uncomfortable with the intruder narrative. The investigation would span years, becoming an obsession for detectives who couldn't let the case go. Initially, they followed every possible lead with open minds. A neighbor had reported seeing an unusual person walking near a church in the days before the shooting. Jeremy had apparently noticed this too. Someone had texted him about it because he was known as a sort of neighborhood watchman, always alert to anything out of place in the community. Another tip pointed to a neighbor identified in court records only as JB. Investigators interviewed him multiple times over the years, examined his possible connection to the case, tracked his movements, scrutinized his alibi. Eventually, they excluded him as a suspect. He died before the case ever went to trial, taking whatever knowledge he might have had with him. There were rumors of a drug deal gone wrong, the kind of speculation that follows any unexplained death in rural America, where people search for explanations that make sense of senseless violence. Investigators looked into it thoroughly and found nothing substantive. No evidence of drug involvement, no suspicious contacts, no financial trails suggesting illicit activity. But even as alternative theories fizzled one by one, the circumstantial evidence against Julene continued to accumulate like snow in winter. Forensic experts examined the bullet jacket fragments recovered from the bedroom. The analysis was consistent with the rounds having been fired from the .357 Magnum found on the kitchen floor. The bullet itself was never recovered. It had fragmented upon impact with Jeremy's skull, but the weapon analysis pointed strongly to that specific gun as the murder weapon. The gun showed no conclusive biological evidence tying it to the shooter. No fingerprints that could be definitively matched. No DNA under the grip. But it also showed nothing tying it to any mysterious intruder. No foreign DNA. No evidence of anyone else's presence. The black gloves found outside the house contained DNA from both Jeremy and Julene, consistent with gloves that either of them might have worn while working outside, not proof of any intruder. Footprints in the nearby woods had no identifying characteristics that could help or hurt either theory. The camera footage showed nothing. The 4 alert German shepherds had made no sound during the critical window when Jeremy was killed. Yet when police arrived with sirens and lights, dash cam footage confirmed the dogs barked immediately and aggressively, exactly as guard dogs should. They reacted to strangers. They just hadn't reacted to anyone that night. In 2013, investigators interviewed Julene again, pressing her on the inconsistencies in her story. 4 years had passed since Jeremy's death, but the case remained open, unsolved, haunting everyone who had worked on it. And in October 2014, nearly 5 years after that November morning, a Lorain County grand jury returned an indictment. Julene Simcoe was charged with murder in the death of her husband. She turned herself in and was released on a $500,000 bond, returning home to wait for the trial that would determine the rest of her life. The case went to trial in September 2017, 8 years after Jeremy Simcoe died in his bed. Julene made an unusual decision. She waived her right to a jury trial, opting instead for a bench trial. This meant that Judge Mark Betleski alone would weigh the evidence and determine her guilt or innocence. No 12 citizens deliberating. No unanimous verdict required. Just one man, trained in law, deciding whether the state had proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense called no witnesses. Their entire strategy rested on challenging the prosecution's case, arguing that circumstantial evidence, no matter how suggestive, wasn't enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no murder weapon conclusively tied to Julene, no confession, no eyewitness who saw her pull the trigger, just a web of suspicious circumstances and an alternative scenario that seemed implausible but couldn't be completely disproven. The prosecution laid out their theory methodically, building their case brick by brick. An unknown intruder, they argued, would have had to accomplish something virtually impossible. This hypothetical killer would have had to bypass the locked gate, avoid triggering the driveway sensor, pass 4 German shepherds without a single bark, enter through a door without forcing it, meaning either picking a lock or having a key, navigate an unfamiliar house in complete darkness, find and retrieve a weapon from a china cabinet without knowing it was there, locate the master bedroom, execute a sleeping man at point-blank range while his armed wife was somewhere unknown in the building, possibly awake, possibly armed, certainly dangerous if discovered. Then this intruder would have had to place the gun carefully on the kitchen floor rather than dropping it in flight. Exit the house, escape the property. Leave no DNA, no fingerprints, no footprints, no camera footage, no physical evidence of any kind. And this intruder would have done all of this without stealing anything. Not the other guns, not any cash, not any valuables, nothing. The alternative explanation, prosecutors argued, required far fewer leaps of logic. On October 20, 2017, Judge Betleski delivered his verdict: guilty. In his ruling, the judge acknowledged something unusual. The prosecution hadn't sufficiently proven motive. Why would Julene kill her husband? The financial stress theory was incomplete. Denied loans create frustration, not typically murder. The marriage dynamics were open to interpretation. Investigators had found certain intimate materials in the home that suggested an unconventional relationship dynamic, but Julene insisted everything was consensual and nothing proved otherwise. The why remained murky, even at the end of the trial. But motive, Judge Betleski noted, isn't a required element for conviction in Ohio. Prosecutors don't have to prove why someone committed murder, only that they did commit it, beyond a reasonable doubt. Looking at the universe of possible explanations, a random stranger, a hired assassin, or the spouse sleeping one floor away, the judge concluded that only one scenario made logical sense given all the evidence. On October 27, 2017, Julene Simcoe was sentenced to 28 years to life in prison for the murder of her husband. She appealed, arguing that the evidence was insufficient to support the conviction. Her attorneys maintained that reasonable doubt existed, that the intruder theory, however unlikely, couldn't be completely eliminated. In April 2021, the Ohio Ninth District Court of Appeals affirmed the verdict. The justices found no reversible error. The conviction stands. Today, if you drive along Northridge Road in Brownhelm Township, you might pass the property without a second glance. Just another rural home among many. Trees that someone else tends now. A driveway that no longer leads to a fortress. The ordinary architecture of what was once an extraordinary life. But for those who knew Jeremy Simcoe, the loss still reverberates through the years like ripples on still water. His family remembers a man who taught his nieces and nephews to swim in summer lakes, to hunt responsibly in autumn woods, to drive carefully on backcountry roads, who could identify trees at a glance and climb them with the confidence of someone born for that specific purpose, who built a business from nothing through sheer will and meticulous attention to detail. Jeremy Simcoe had prepared for every possible danger, but sometimes the threat doesn't come from outside the walls. Sometimes the person we trust most completely is the one we should have feared. And sometimes the fortresses we build aren't meant to protect us from the world. They're meant to hide what happens within. If this case resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who appreciates true crime that respects both the facts and the lives behind them. It's through your support that we can continue telling these stories, not for sensationalism, but for understanding. Because remembering the people behind the cases, honoring who they were before tragedy found them, is how we keep their memory alive.